So how is everybody doing?
Great.
It's our last session. It went by fast, I feel like, especially with the holidays, this group in particular. Some groups kind of drag on sometimes,
We're better than everybody else.
Yeah. You did a great, it's been really fun.
Why? Confidence in everybody in this room.
And I feel like, I'll wait till everybody gets here. But I feel like lesson 8 kind of brings it together in a really meaningful way, everything that we've practiced. So there's hopefully some light bulbs will go off today, and it'll, just connecting those dots, some good insights into the practices and how you could work with them moving forward. That's the goal. Okay? Does anybody want to share anything that's come up in the last week before everybody arrives?
These are great.
Good.
Great. I'm sharing with my daughters.
Awesome.
Do you have
Yeah.
scanners on your phone?
No, you just have to take your picture.
I took a picture, but it didn't do anything.
iPhones have it where it automatically reads those.
Yeah.
As like a
Yeah,
QR
you need a
scanner.
scanner.
It asks if you want to follow the link if Android.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
But I took
just
a picture,
ask
but
them.
didn't.
So don't take a picture of it,
Here.
right?
Hold it over
I,
it.
I,
You need barcode.
I took a picture
What
of
should you
it.
Did you?
Yeah, and then
He's flipping out.
That's okay.
You see the barcode reader, reads it and downloads it.
All right, I'll talk to you later if I get stuck. Thank you.
Yeah, we could help you, if you can't get it.
I
So,
did.
okay. But on the portal too, we'll, and I'm going to talk to Robert about this. He doesn't really know, and it's not super important for you guys, but, well, it is important, I guess. We transitioned from our original platform, which is what you've been using, because we were in the middle of your training when we transitioned, to a brand new platform, which is much easier to work with and much more user-friendly, and we'll have more content on it and content available. So I'm going to talk to Robert about a couple of ideas, because typically we keep the portal open for 90 days after we're completed. So you'll still have access to the material. And I'm going to talk to him about some different options that he could have for you guys moving forward. But what I love about the new portal especially is we're just investing a ton of time and energy and money into content. And so moving forward, you could go into that portal and you'll be able to access yoga, short yoga sequences, breathing practices, different mind training practices, and even you guys know who Katie Williams is, right? Katie from the club. She's a horticulturist, and she's very gifted with plants and that sort of thing. And she's working on a really cool workshop for how being around plants and taking care of plants is a mindfulness exercise. It's a practice, and it could be really supportive to each of you. I was actually thinking about you for baking. That's a practice too. The point of it is that you could apply mindfulness into any activity, and it can be much more meaningful. But especially work, like creative work, like working with food and decorating and planning these events. And I mean, everything you do, if you add this attention in a really specific way, it could be your practice time. And it could really, instead of it feeling stressful and overwhelming, it could just be a practice in being present with what's happening right now. So that's kind of where I want to get you to, is thinking about your life as a meditation, really. And it's such a beautiful way to live, right? It makes every moment more meaningful. So we'll go ahead and get started. And we're waiting on one more, just Robert.
Maybe Jen too, I don't know.
The company that we have here is not done until 3, right? So I don't know if he's going to be with them.
That's okay. So let's get started. And he could always log back in. Okay, so we're going to start out with a practice. Well, maybe somebody's coming now. Let me just set up the time.
They're coming from upstairs.
Okay. Why don't we close the door? Do you mind closing the door? Okay. So, okay. So we're going to work with meditation this morning. And this meditation is named Big Sky Meditation. Sometimes you'll hear it named Big Sky Mind. And it's just very helpful, and it'll kind of bring some of the puzzle pieces together, and then we'll kind of dissect it. So we'll be doing this practice for 10 minutes, which is a longer practice than we normally do. And I'll keep you attuned to where we're at, because I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. If at any time you do feel overwhelmed, just open your eyes, right? If you feel like you're getting sleepy or noticing sleepiness, that's especially helpful. It's a helpful tool just to open the eyes. It'll bring a wakefulness in. Remember, you could lean into your inhale, the in-breath, that there's a wakeful quality there, an alertness there. And if at any...
Just snore louder.
What?
John will just snore louder.
No, John never snores.
You guys spend a lot of nights together? Or?
No, I mean,
What I will say, the sleepiness is a very common for beginner meditators. It's just normal. It's a normal part of starting the practices, okay? Because for the first time, maybe ever, you're learning to relax your system,
I understand.
right? So just know that that's a struggle that every new practitioner will face. And remember not to get too rigid on rules of the practice, okay? So just opening your eyes, it doesn't mean that you're doing the practice wrong. It means that you notice that something's going, in a different direction and you're trying to intervene. That's a practice of being mindful. You can doze off with your eyes open. So if that starts happening, stand up, right? It's less likely to happen if you're doing a standing practice. When I think I probably told you guys this little, sometimes you have these little things you tell everybody, but if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. But my teacher, Sarah, I was traveling back and forth to London, and I was trying to take the red eye in and do my classes, and then as soon as my classes are over, fly home, just to not be away from my responsibilities here. So I was exhausted, and I was really struggling, sleepy, falling asleep. And sorry, this is on. And I said, Sarah, I'm sleepy. I noticed it. I opened my eyes. I was still falling asleep. I stood up. I was still falling asleep. I'm like, what should I do? She's like, Jen, take a nap. Right? Don't meditate right now, right? So don't let it be so serious all the time. It could just be this beautiful way to just tune in, right? You could even think of the practices that way. I'm just kind of tuning in to see what's here, okay? And really that Vipassana out loud exercise we did last week, did you guys find that helpful? That meditating out loud with each other? And you may not have, right? But you did? You found it helpful? Good. How are you feeling, by the way?
Better.
Good.
Especially after that, yeah.
Yes.
It was really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. We have so much control, more control over the physical body than we think we do, right?
Right.
You have to share your story after this. We'll get into some content. You don't have to. Sorry, I put you on the spot.
I
But it's
could if you wanted to.
But it's very true, right? We could just change, and the mind is very powerful. So this week's content is all about mindfulness of the mind. And this is an aha type of moment, right? So let's dig into the meditation, and then we'll get into the content. All right, so sit up nice and tall. And close your eyes when you're ready, and you'll hear the tones in a moment. And just taking a moment to notice the quiet in the space today. And just notice that you're noticing some sounds coming into the space and life happening around you. And acknowledging how your body is sitting. Just bringing attention into the body for a moment. Noticing your feet. Noticing your seat. Noticing the breath. Now gently guide your awareness into your senses for a moment, especially noticing sound. Notice how sounds rise into the field of awareness and then fall. Notice also the space between the sounds. And notice the layers of sounds, sounds that feel closer and sounds that are really far away. And now notice how it feels to notice these subtleties in just sound. Now see if you could relax that method and imagine just placing the method of listening to the side or shelving it or setting it down next to the table. And now rest your attention on either the breath or your body, perhaps the hands or the feet. And as your attention starts resting into the anchor, imagine the mind as big and open and as spacious as the sky. And now imagine any sounds or distractions, any sensations or thoughts. Moving across that big sky mind, like clouds passing by. And you can invite these clouds of thought or sound or distraction or sensation to occupy about 10% of your attention. And invite the mind to rest in the bright blue, boundless space of the sky. Notice when a thought or memory or sound takes up more space. And see if you could just allow that space to be just as it is. Just as the clouds in the sky sometimes grow large and dim the brightness and clarity that's there. They also retreat and clear and pass through. Invite the tones in. Invite your attention to land back into this present moment. Hi, everybody. So did that feel short or long for you?
I think it felt short.
That's what I was gonna say, I never would have guessed it was 10.
Right.
When you said that at first, I'm like, oh, how am I actually gonna do
Literally,
this?
the whole time.
Like, oh man.
I didn't want to leave the big blue sky.
I
was
know.
Let's just stay here.
Let's just stay in the blue sky. So interestingly enough, that meditation could be very, very calming, right? And it could also feel a little overwhelming if we visualize any entanglements, whenever we're getting entangled in a thought or a story or a distraction or a sensation, we could imagine the clouds growing. And sometimes that could be, you could really feel that, right? But that reminder that the clouds will then retreat, right, or move or pass. And that question that we asked last week in our Vipassana out loud okay, what am I noticing right now? This is what I'm noticing, and can I be with it? Right? So that's the inquiry or the slogan that you could use that's really supportive. Can I be with what's here right now? And that visualization can be helpful sometimes. Well, yeah, because we know that cloud's going to pass. We trust in the impermanence of the clouds moving through, right? But sometimes that big sky, the mind of the big sky, can just be really crystal clear and blue, and it can feel warm and bright, and it really is a way to refresh the system. So visualizations can be very, very powerful and supportive. But it's a matter of practice. We have to practice with them, and we have to figure out what works for us. But you could just simplify this if you try to work with it on your own, right? Is just visualizing this bright blue, the sunniest day you could imagine with the warmth of the sun, and just allowing, whatever arises to arise. That's the idea, right? And it will pass by. It'll pass by. So we could use it as you feel it's supportive. That's the idea. What questions? Anybody want to add anything to what they noticed there or what came up for you? No?
That image reminded me of a movie that, I don't remember what it was called, but it was a girl that was actually killed, and she was in the in-between. Maybe you know what movie I'm talking about. Saoirse Ronan was in it, like younger. Anyway, that blue sky, and then there was a tree, and it was kind of like the universe and the in-between, and life and death and joy and sadness. So it was like a little overwhelming because that I related that image to that. Like that was in the movie. This big bright blue sky with just this one tree and
Yeah, that could be.
Didn't expect that. That was a lot.
Yeah. It's interesting. These philosophies are really mingled in with culture, our pop culture, and the more you start to learn about these practices and the traditions behind them, the more attuned you get to the meaning behind some of these. Whether it's movies or art, these common themes. Somebody I work with sent me a link to a theory called Stoicism, and it's the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius and the ancient Romans, in Greek, philosophies that came out of Greece, and it's all the same. It's all about impermanence and compassion and minding the mind and having control over your mind, essentially, working with the mind and understanding what the mind's job is. And it was really interesting to me because I'd never read about it or knew about these theories, and I said, yeah, I could see why you're really drawn to this, because there's a lot of parallels here in what we've been working with and talking about. And I said, just work with what is interesting to you. Get curious about it. Because we're all having this really human experience, and it's really similar, That's what we find in these practices, and that's why it's so helpful to practice in a group and have a buddy and a mentor, and because we realize, wow, I'm not so different, right? I'm not having this different experience. We talked about this a little last week, right? This common humanity. So what we're here today to talk about is that everything we've been doing has prepared us to start confronting the mind, which at first could be really overwhelming. You could get quiet and you realize that it's really loud inside. Right? My first silent meditation, at the end of it, when we came out in silence, one of the people in my group said, I didn't realize how loud this retreat would be. I was expecting it to be quiet, but it was really loud the whole time, and you start noticing what the mind's doing, and that could be frightening at first. So everything you've learned up until now is, okay, how do I work with this? What's here? The reality of things. Right? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The anchor, of course, just starting back to lesson 1 and the purpose of having an anchor. And how would you define that now? Your anchor, whether it's the breath, whether it's the body, whether you're working with your senses. Right? How would you describe it? How is it helpful?
It's hard to describe, but it's the practice, the technique of paying attention to that and then learning to push away the thoughts. It's just the ability to do that. It's rest.
Right.
It's peace.
It brings you back, right? It's a point to come back to. And I want to come back to what you said, pushing the thoughts, okay? Because we're going to come back to that. Who finds it supportive to rest or anchor in the breath? Just as a raise of hands. Okay. And who does not? Who finds it more supportive to rest in the body, your attention? Body. Good. So just work with what feels most supportive. I really want to emphasize that, okay? So you don't have to change it at all, right? Well, as you move along, as you deepen on your own, you'll know when the interest starts peaking in other areas or in other ways. And it's a willingness to explore and see what's there right now. So the attachment is where we have to be careful of that. We don't want to get too attached to any one method, in other words, right? So be willing to notice when there's some curiosity arising about using a different method, right? But nothing's wrong. You can't do it wrong, okay? Mindfulness of breath, learning to trust in the breath, it is very supportive for most people. Like I said, and I'll emphasize, if it's not supportive for you, that's okay, right? But it's important to notice the breath and understand the qualities of the breath so we could lean into them when we need to, right? So those qualities of the breath are supportive not only in the formal practices, but in the informal practices. This moment-to-moment awareness that we have just in life, right? So noticing when the overwhelm's coming in and the willingness to lean into the exhale, to relax the system. Noticing when we need a little more energy, when we're feeling sleepy, and leaning into the inhale, the alertness, when we're looking for that wakefulness, whether that's in practice or in real life. Okay, so really trusting in the qualities of the breath is part of it. The body, just working with sensation, right? Know that and trusting that your body's absorbing everything you're confronted with, both here and everywhere else you are, in any relationship you're in, whether that relationship is something that's very close or not, just an acquaintance. Any interaction, the news, right? Facebook, right? Do you ever look at Facebook and you feel like you're knotted up after you look at it, right? There's tension in the body. okay, especially today, right, to the State of the Union, right? It happens, right? It doesn't matter what political side we're on or what our beliefs are, but we're in a society that's so interconnected, yet we feel so separate. It's so polarized. So anything that's coming into the view can affect the body. So just noticing how the body's absorbing that. Okay? And that willingness to just relax the system with more intention. Because we know that the triggers are going to land here. So how can we soften that blow, really? All right? If the triggers are landing inside, whether it's a stressful day here or at home, see if you could just drop into relaxing the spaces around the absorption points. So whether you're dealing with discomfort or pain, we could just take a deeper look, right? Who's looking is the question, right? So we're going to get into that in a minute. So I'm just kind of going through all of these. Mindfulness of feelings, understanding that feeling tones are different than emotional states. Knowing that the feeling tones are mostly going to be in the neutral territory. We spend a lot of time there. But being able to recognize and look for those unpleasant tones or the pleasant tones and recalibrating the system from there. Okay? That openness to the emotions that are really sharp and can be overwhelming. That willingness to invite those in as well. Right? So the shames of life, jealousy, anger, fear, grief, joy, excitement, ecstasy, right? Happiness, invite it in. How can you be with that and not push it away? Right? Inviting whatever comes up. And of course, mindfulness of the mind. So, there's a quote I want to read to you, and it's a traditional quote from Buddhism, and it says, "Who is your enemy?" said the Buddha. "Mind is your enemy. No one can harm you more than a mind untrained. Who is your friend? Mind is your friend. No one can assist you and care for you better than your mind well trained, not even the most loving mother or father." So in other words, the mind can be our closest ally, and the mind can be our greatest enemy. So how do we work with that? That's what this lesson's about. I want to start with what the mind is actually supposed to do. So what is the job of the mind? What is the job of the mind? To think. What else?
Remember your muscles.
Right. It's in control of our systems, right? What else? What is the job of the mind?
To analyze and understand everything you're taking in from
Sure.
your senses.
Right. To cognitively process, right? To reason, to imagine, to create, to remember, to ruminate, right? To problem solve, to control, to learn, right? All these things. We need the mind, right? We can't be alive without the mind. The system can't run without the mind. So we could have tremendous gratitude for all of those gifts of the mind. Without it, we wouldn't be having a human experience. It's our way of navigating through the world. And so that's how we can befriend the mind, for all of those gifts that the mind gives us. But what are things that the mind does that sometimes don't feel as supportive? Sometimes,
Worries.
right? Maybe that could be a gift, though. Worries, the mind worries.
Dreams.
Dreams could be a gift, right? Arguably.
Holds the negative memories.
Yeah, remembers. Ruminates. Worries about the future.
Overanalyzes.
Overanalyzes. What else?
Holds grudges.
But get caught up.
Get caught up.
Yeah. Entangled, we call that. Right? You get really stuck. Yeah. So let's pause there for a second because that's a really important part of this. So when did we use that word before? Entangled. We've used it before in these classes.
Wasn't it with like emotions and feelings?
Yeah. So what could cause an entanglement? Remember we talked about the neuroscience of emotions and that they could track emotions in the system, and they take about 90 seconds where they peak and then dissipate and leave. Unless what?
We let it stay there.
How? Through the entanglement. Where's the entanglement happening? Where does it happen? What gets entangled?
Your mind
The mind. Yeah.
gets entangled in the
We-
emotion and continues
Yeah.
to convince yourself.
We
that-
just get caught up in it, right? Well, I'm really angry because this happened, right? And she did this or he did this because of this, right? And we start getting caught up, and we all do it. We all do it. So how many times, have you, maybe there's somebody here that you work with, for instance, and it happens to everybody, right? And maybe they walk in and they had a really bad morning, a fight with their husband, who knows, right? And they walk right past you, and your mind starts thinking, oh, she's mad about whatever happened yesterday or the day before or last time I saw her or something I said. And we take it really personally. And then that entanglement in the mind can also get caught up where? Where can the entanglement go? In the body. Right? We know what that feels like. The body could start responding to that or get entangled in the story of the mind. Right? We could feel a lot of tension in our body. Or if there's anger involved, we could feel heat. Right? We could feel tightness. You could feel anxiety. The system could get involved. Right? We could start releasing stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And then what's happening? Do you see where I'm going with this? So the entanglement can wrap the whole system up in this cycle where everything's just like this inside. And now all we're thinking about is a story. And where did that story come from?
It's your mind.
The mind.
It's just made itself up.
Yeah.
Steroids
And-
did that to me.
Right? What?
It said steroids did that to me.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the question is this story true?
Most times no.
Right. So how can where do you start? That's where you start. Is there a possibility that this story isn't even true? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be yes. There's a strong possibility that this has nothing to do with me, that this has nothing to do with me at all, that she just had a fight with her husband this morning. Right? And it could avoid a lot of drama, not just at work, but in your personal relationships where we do this all the time. Right? We just get caught up, especially in the people that you love the most. You're just going to get wound up, and they know how to push your buttons. Right? Yeah.
I think too that when one person is stressed out and they're caught up in that.
Yes.
like, it'll go to you.
It ripples.
It just goes
It
through.
ripples right through the
Right
through the
through
whole
the-
group.
through the whole
Yeah, especially in a small group like this, right? It could just and it builds there's momentum behind it, and there's energy, right? So then a lot of stories could come into the fold. So sometimes, and Christine and I, and you've met Christine, and she and I a few months ago, we had this sort of thing come up where, we had a disagreement about something, and then, there was a story going on in my head, and there was a story going on in her head, and we could both feel it, and it was uncomfortable because we knew we were both feeling something. And we both had different ideas about what we were feeling and why. And so we sat down, and I said, the story I'm telling myself right now is that you're going to quit. And that I'm going to have to start over and replace you, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do that, and this and that. And I went on and on. I just told her the story that was going on in my head. The whole like soap opera. And there were characters in it besides me, and they were contributing to the story, right? And she smiled and she said, the story I'm telling myself is you're going to fire me because you're not happy with this piece of work that I put out, and this, and so she had her whole story, and neither story was true. And we laughed and we worked it out and we got through it. But that's hard to do, right? So it's just recognizing when you're entangled and the willingness to just look a little clearer at that entanglement and say, what else is here, right? Get it out of the mind. When the mind's entangled in a story, you could always feel it in your body too. Right? And we did some of these exercises together when we went through the mindfulness of body, right? Feeling things inside, noticing, right? Where this is coming up for you. It always has a story. It always has an emotion tangled up too. So if you could just create a little space there, the truth of the matter starts revealing itself. And then we begin questioning the mind, because what's happening at that point is we're noticing that the mind is tangled. In other words, we're minding the mind. We've created now a space between noticing and being caught up in it. Once we notice we're caught up, that's when the spaciousness comes in. Once we notice we're caught up, that's the opportunity to pull away from it and see it from a different vantage point. That's when we have the opportunity to act responsively, to question it. But without that spaciousness, we just stay there. Some people are caught up in a story their entire life. Their whole life is about a story that they can't let go of, that might not even be true. And you know people like this. You have people in your life that can't let go of the story. And that's very sad, right? So mindfulness of mind is seeing, it's becoming a witness to the mind. Because that's what you're doing in meditation, right? So we're starting with sound and we're witnessing the mind notice sound. Who found it powerful to notice the layers of sound? Yeah, there's layers in sound, lots of them. And there's spaces between sound, right? And when we're noticing the senses, it's a nice inroad to noticing thoughts. Because what we're doing is we're witnessing the mind processing sound. The mind is what's processing the sound. And if we could witness the mind processing sound, we could witness the mind getting caught up in emotion or thought or sensation. Somebody that I don't like, so I'll just put it out there. We don't have to like everyone, right? Being a mindfulness teacher doesn't make us a saint. I don't want ill will for this person, but I don't like her. And when I was with her, and she doesn't have respect for my work, so I'll also put that out there. And that could be a story that I'm holding on to. And she said, well, in one word, tell me what mindfulness means. And I said, well, if I had to choose one word for mindfulness or these practices, it would be spaciousness. It's about creating space. And she, went on to make fun of me, which was fine. But that's true. It's all about creating space, right? It's all about creating this space. And that Viktor Frankl quote that I read to you a few weeks back, right? That in between that trigger, there's opportunity to create space. And that opportunity to create space is where our freedom resides. That's our freedom to choose how we respond in any situation. And that's even more powerful when that responsiveness is targeted towards how we're treating self. So if we're noticing we're getting caught up, just that noticing opens the door, right? And if we could sneak into that doorway, crack it open a little bit bigger, we could walk in, and when that spaciousness comes in, we could choose how we're going to respond to the entanglement in the mind, or the story in the mind, or the rumination, or the memory, right? And that memory could just be a story. And that story can be true. So the memory could be a story of pain, especially when it's wrapped up in childhood, especially when it's wrapped up in trauma. And there could be truth there. And that story was true for the person that experienced it. But are you the same person now, 20 years later? No. You're not. Every cell in your body has changed several times. Right? Those memories are true, but the big self has grown up. Right? And can make choices for itself. Right? And that's strong, and there's courage there, and strength, and ability to move forward in a different way. And the more we could create space and include the truth of the joys and sorrows of our life and ask them to just be a part of the whole instead of being pushed away, kind of hidden in the caves of our life, right? The less they'll beg for attention, and the less we'll get caught up there in the traumas that we've experienced. So that spaciousness doesn't mean that we just push it all away. The spaciousness includes all of it. And because we're having this human experience, the truths or the untruths can be there with loving kindness and compassion, because we're just doing the best we can. So there's a couple things I don't want to miss here, so I have to refer to my notes a little. So some of the benefits of being able to create this spaciousness, this mindfulness of the mind, doing its job, right? Doing the jobs that are supportive to us and the jobs that tend to be unsupportive too, right? So we know one of the jobs of the mind is to make sense of the world And sometimes in trying to make sense of the world for survival, we get caught up in these things that might not be true or supportive. Okay? So we come to think better. Thinking clears up. We have more clarity. Right? We could see the mind doing the jobs that it's meant to do. Right? And then we're less likely to get caught up. So we could just say or name, well, the mind's trying to make sense of this situation that's hard. Right? And that's its job. That's what it's supposed to do. And that creates some spaciousness. Do you see that? We become more productive and more efficient in our thinking. So we are less likely to mull things over, right, too long. Sometimes we need time with different, when we're trying to make decisions, right? But do you know somebody in your life that can't make a decision, right? Keeps coming back to the same question. We're able to get really clear on those things, okay? Our intuitive abilities, that authentic wisdom that we're trying to tap into, is easier to access, right? So we learn how to move into the body more when the mind feels stuck, right? Looking into the body for some wisdom. The wisdom's always in the body. We just have to look for it. The belly space, the hara, that earth center. My teacher calls it the womb of totality. Right? Isn't that cool? The womb of totality. Right? Everything's there. We could go there. We could increase our capacity to be creative and in problem solving, in out of the box ideas, innovation. Right? We have better access there when we're being mindful of the mind. And we can declutter, right? So often there's a lot of clutter in the way of clear thinking. And we could just kind of notice these cluttered thoughts and name them as that. Oh, here's some clutter in the mind. It's like cleaning out a closet, right? We could just sweep it through and it can move through like the clouds in the sky. So remember, the methods that we use in formal practice are always accessible to us in informal ways. Mindfulness becomes a part of just behaving, of operating. We have clear access to it. The mind tends to become more positive. We get less, likely to get caught up in negative thinking. Right? So we could choose to lean into the glass is half full, right? Gratitude cannot occupy the same space as despair. So when we notice the mind dropping into negative patterns, because patterns are always there in all of us, and when we can see them repeating themselves, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit, we could shift into gratitude, into the joy, right? Into the blessings, whatever you want to call them. Name 3 with intention. What are 3 things I'm grateful for right now? Because the mind can't occupy, it can't hold gratitude and despair at the same time. It's impossible. So journaling, gratitude journals are very, very effective in helping us to shift into that more positive direction. Awareness of the mind or mindfulness of the mind clears up more space for full presence in relationship. So we're able to attend to that which is most important to us, are the people in our lives, our relationships, our beloveds. Right? If the mind is cluttered and caught up in stories that aren't even true, how can we be present with each other? It's very, very hard. Okay? So, presence, full presence, always drops us or moves our attention from the mind into the heart. And we know we're in full presence when we feel that shift down. When we're communicating from the cognitive space, when we're thinking through a reply or trying to fix someone, and that's usually our closest people, right? Cognitively, we'll talk quicker. We'll express ourselves quickly. The mind is fast, right? It wants to get ahead of the problem. When we're communicating from the heart space, everything slows down. And so that's how you could really learn to tell where it's coming from, where presence is coming from. True presence, and we feel it, right? We feel it. That's why we want to be around people that are really open-hearted. They're easier to be around, right? They're the people, they're our empaths, right, in life. And they feel so much because they're always kind of open from here, curious, and attending to full presence. Okay? So if we want to get there, we have to look for those signs of the mind's kind of thinking its way through. Okay? There's a word, I think I shared this word with you before, and it's called bodhicitta. It's a traditional word. Bodhicitta. Bodhicitta. And a bodhicitta is a being that it means mind heart. So it's a term because in Tibetan, in Pali and Sanskrit languages, that's what they're trying to pull together always, is the mind and the heart. And that's where there's a lot of power there. The bodhisattva is a person that just wants to reduce suffering for all beings. Mother Teresa was a bodhisattva, right? She's a prime example. Traditionally, they'll point to her as a bodhisattva. Okay, so, but we all have that capacity. That's my point in bringing it up. You don't have to name yourself these words that we don't understand, have never heard of, right? But it's a beautiful expression, I think, and that's why I named it today. This idea that we can build this capacity to move from the mind into the heart. You have it in you. It's in our DNA. We care about each other, right? We just have to be willing to open to the quivering of the heart, right? So some different tools for working with the mind, okay? I have to get my glasses. I apologize. I'm having trouble seeing. And I have new funny glasses to show off today. Okay. So much better. Okay, so we're going to use this as a practice. So I'd like you to sit up nice and tall. We're going to do a short practice. And I just wanted to remind everyone, we are going over 15 minutes today. Okay, good. All right, so sit up nice and tall. Close your eyes. And I'm going to time you for 1 minute, so you'll hear the bells. And in that 1 minute, as soon as you notice the bells, I'd like you to start counting how many thoughts come into the mind in 1 minute. Okay? can open your eyes. All right, so we're going to go around and share how many thoughts, and we'll start with Gretchen.
Not very many. 4.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine was 8.
7.
I only had 1. 12. 15.
2,
3.
19.
30.
3.
I had 10. So, were the thoughts long or short? Anybody could jump in. What did you
Short.
notice?
Really short.
Long.
Really short.
One of them was long.
Yeah. They could be both, right? Right. So you could have one long thought that takes up the whole minute that you could be really caught up in. Or you could have lots of dashy kind of like sparkly thoughts that just pop in and out. Right? Or you could be like a squirrel, right? Squirrely thoughts that are just kind of popping their head up, right? What you're noticing. In other words, you never know what's there, right? But did anyone notice thoughts that are pretty common? Yes. You did?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Anybody else? Were there common? Good. There's always a list of like top 10 hits, right, in the mind. So the mind ruminates mostly on common themes. They could be work-related. They could be relational, right? I have this really crazy common theme about my hair. You know, like I'm always thinking, should I get my hair cut? Should I get bangs? Should I wear it curly? Should I straighten it? Right? These thoughts, like that have no meaning, that will come up almost every time I meditate. Like, what's my hair going to do today? Right? Why is that occupying space in my mind? Right? So but when we start noticing these common top 10 kind of themes coming up, we could just kind of bow to them. There's worrying about Jacob, right? Worrying about one of your kids, whatever, right? That's a common theme, right? For any parent, worry, right? And we could just bow to them. That's the mind of the job. Imagine just bowing to the thought. Oh, here you are today, curly hair thought, right? We could just bow to it. We could just acknowledge it, right? It's just part of the mind. The mind will do that, right? So I'd like you to pick a common thought that you have. You know what they are. You don't have to share them, okay? Just one. I know there's a lot. And we're going to do another practice, okay? So this practice will be about 3 minutes, and I'll be leading you through. So we'll hear the bells in just a moment. So I'd like each of you to really invite that thought in. Imagine just inviting it in and asking it to sit down and have tea. Now, apply a color to this thought. Just give it a color, just one. And if you had to give it a size, like a cloud in the sky, how much space would it occupy? how does this thought feel? Do you feel it in your body? How does it feel to grasp it a little tighter, to hold on to this thought? How does that feel? Now, how does it feel to just let it go? If we just let the thought pass through. So just kind of opening to that thought leaving. And how does that feel? And notice the quality of the mind in this moment and how things have shifted or not shifted. So acknowledge that too. We're going to slowly relax the method. And when you're ready, I'll invite you to open your eyes. So really watching the mind, right? That's interesting. What questions do you have from that exercise? Or anything you want to share. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. How did it feel to give the thought a color?
Weird.
Weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it was like two different emotions that could go along, I guess, like with the color that I picked.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like trying to decide which one I felt more of at that time.
Good. That's so good. So there's a possibility that there was something else beneath it or next to it. And so you could do that. You could just say, well, there's two colors here, equally as important, right? Remember, you're in charge of this navigation. So if it needs to be two, give it two, right? And be willing. I think the willingness is the curiosity that comes along with maybe going back to it again at some point and see if it's still got two colors, right? Because that could shift. And it often does, right? And was anyone surprised at how much space the thought occupied? Yeah. Right. So what if that one thought, if it occupied a lot less space, what's left? Right. And sometimes this work takes a while, guys, so we don't have to push it. Right? We could just welcome it in. Like, okay, you could be in the sky. But you don't have to take up all the space in the sky. You could just have this corner, right? And I'm going to come back to you. So just by acknowledging and giving attention to these things, it calms them down a bit. Because often they're just asking to be paid attention to. I was with my mentor this morning, as a matter of fact, and he said, you know, I got some news yesterday, and it was a little, you know, like that kind of news, like, oh, right? And he said, well, how much space did you give that? I was like, well, none, you know? And he said, well, did you get your practice in today? I said, yeah, but there was something else occupying the space in the sky. And really, I needed to attend to this other thing that came up, right? So how much time are you giving it, right? Sometimes we just need to pause and say, you know what, I'm just going to sit with this for a minute. And I'm going to name it, and I'm going to give it a color, and I'm going to see how much space it's occupying and what attention it needs, right? And a lot of insight kind of unfolds there. Did anyone notice any insights that they were surprised by, just from those simple questions? Or did you get curious about anything? I guess that's another way of looking at it. How did it feel to hold that thought closer? Did anything come up for any of you? How did it feel to let it go? Let it move, right?
I keep saying that like it's gonna move, but I don't think it ever will. Like, I kinda like pretend it does, but it doesn't go anywhere.
Right. Well, can it just be a part of you? Yeah. Usually the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no, though, right? And sometimes we just need more support in working through that, right? So that's the conclusion you could come to with some of this. Like, wow, I'm really stuck here, and I might need more support with a mentor, teacher, therapist, or your friend, right? It doesn't have to be, this dramatic thing, right? So that's why these practices are so supportive in community, right? So important to do with other, right? I really encourage you to stay tuned in with your meditation buddy if you made that connection and it feels good, right? Okay, a couple more things because we're really running out of time. When we're working with thoughts that are very stressful or disturbing thoughts, thoughts that are that we're really caught up in and really entangled by, I want you to, number one, to ask it, is this true? Is this thought true? And the answer could be yes, it could also be no, or I'm not sure. Right? But make sure you know what that answer is. Is it yes, no, or I'm not sure? Okay? Because that'll give you a lot of space to work with it a little closer. Once you have an answer, and if the answer's yes, this thought is true, I want your next question to be, can I know that this thought is absolutely true? Is it absolutely? Is there no possibility that it's false? Right? And sometimes the answer is yes. This is absolutely the truth. Okay? Often we are not sure. And that possibility of it not being true can open up some space. The next question is, how does holding this thought or thinking this way make me feel in my body? Go to the body, right? We want to know how the body's holding on to it. And moving from the mind into the body is very powerful. Why? Because that creates the space that we need in order to be responsive to what we need in order to work with what's come up. Okay? The other one is, who would I be and how would I feel without this thought? What's that possibility? Who would I be and how would I feel? So hard with reading glasses because I can't see you when I look up. Who would I be and how would I feel without this thought? Okay, so those could be helpful questions, especially when exactly the situation that you mentioned, right? We want to make sure that we understand the patterns and the themes, and we talked a lot about that. So some of the themes could be love, fear, comparing or judging, criticizing, expectations, overly positive and like denying something that's true, right? So being too positive about what's actually real and what's actually happening, or too negative. Like there's a silver lining here and I'm just not looking at the silver lining, right? So anytime we're going really far in one direction, it's kind of like a red flag, right? We want to practice hygiene for the mind, all right? And this outline is going to be available to you because there's a lot of good information here and we're just kind of packing it in. I feel like this lesson needs a little more time. We want to be really mindful about what we're feeding the mind with. All right, so whenever you feel like you're feeding the minds, like you're feeding into, this is where we need to be really careful with gossip. We need to be really careful with social media, with the news, right? Especially with the political climate we're living in. We just need to be careful with what we're putting into the mind. Okay? Because remember, the mind's just always trying to sort it out, right? So moving into the body. I think I covered all of that. We could always notice when we're taking something in, if it's making us feel separate or rigid, okay? If it's making us feel permanent, like we're not able to change, right? Or accept change. But anytime we're rigid or closed, right? Anything that's making us feel separate from other, right? Independent, right? That's where we have to be careful, right? That could cause a lot of suffering. We talked about the top 10 tunes. I'm going to leave you with 2 quotes. This is an old quote from an Indian teacher called Kaveri Patel. And it said, "There's a monkey in my mind swinging on a trapeze, reaching back to the past or leaning into the future, never standing still. Sometimes I want to kill that monkey, shoot it square between the eyes, so I won't have to think anymore or feel the pain of worry. But today, I thanked her, and she jumped straight down into my lap, trapeze still swinging, as we sat still." And the last quote is, "The mind creates the abyss, and the heart crosses it." The mind creates the separateness, and the heart connects. Right? So that bodhicitta, bringing the mind and the heart into this space of equanimity, into balance, right? And understanding when we're going too far, one way or the other. We can't be all heart, right? We can't be. We know people that are, and they ache, right? And they drain themselves, and they just fall over, right? And we can't be all mind. We know those people too. They're just stuck up here, processing, trying to make sense of the world. So how can we bring the two together? It's that always looking for that balance. If we could be in the mind and the heart at the same time. That's the idea. Okay? There's a lot here to unpack. How are you guys feeling? Overwhelmed? Did it start coming together? The practices, when we sit in our formal practice time, all of what you learned could potentially surface. All of it. The most important thing is that you just give yourself a few minutes. You don't even have to time it if the timer makes you feel stressed out. Just that pausing and looking inward, making sure that you have an anchor, because it'll always be supportive no matter what method's coming up. Just noticing simply what's there, right? And sometimes it'll all be tied up in the heart, the drama of the heart, right? And sometimes you'll just notice that the mind's busy and ruminating or full of a thought or many thoughts. And sometimes all of your attention will be in your body, in discomfort, right? In pain, perhaps. Whatever it is, it's always the willingness to turn towards it, right? That RAIN acronym is so supportive. Recognizing what's here, allowing it to be here, welcoming it in. That Rumi poem, so beautiful, right? Open the door and let them in, right? Investigating, getting curious about it, whatever it is, kind of looking a little deeper and allowing whatever comes up to come up, and then just nurturing it with a non-identification, non-attachment, right? Not getting too clingy. So when we held that thought close, it could feel rigid when we start holding things too tight. It'll also feel uncomfortable if we push them away, right? So it's knowing that anything could be in that view, in that big sky, anything could pop up. Who knows, right? That's kind of the cool thing about it, actually, because we don't know from moment to moment what's coming up. But we could hold it all, that trust in that freedom in knowing that whatever it is that comes up, we have the capacity to be with it. And it might suck. It might suck for a while, right? We could be in the muck of it for a while, but that's going to change, right? But when we're in the beauty, let's really be in it, right? Let's not miss out in the beauty of life, in those special moments, those precious moments. Right? And that's what keeps me coming back to these practices, is that's freedom. That knowing that you could be in that whatever might come up could come up, and I could be with it. So my hope is that each of you experience some of this freedom too. And my hope is that you stay in touch with me, and ask questions if you need it, and go. In ideal world, you would go back and do all these sessions again on your own, right? Give yourself a lot of time. When I learned this, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, it took me 2 years to work with it before I talked to anybody about it, right? I just needed time with it. It changed my life, right? It was a totally different way of thinking, of seeing the world, of processing, of working with some of the muck, that came up for me. So don't rush it, right? This is just like the beginning, and this could be a lifelong practice for you. Right? So I just want to thank each of you. I know we went a few minutes over. I'm sorry.
It's worth it.
I really do mean it. I'm here a lot. And I know all of you now in a different way, and I'm grateful for that. And I really want to see you continue down these roads, this path, and if you're not ready for it yet too, I don't want you to feel pressured, but if you get curious about it down the road, I'm always open to talking about it. It's really, truly is my life's work, and my hope that, you know, not only that you will benefit from these practices, but also share them, you know, eventually. So, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.